Sahana Vavatu, Sahanao Bhunaktu, Sahaviryang Karavavahai, Tejasvina Vadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So in verse 24, chapter 4, Krishna is showing us a vision, a framework. What's it like to see properly? You see, we don't really get taught how to see properly. We get taught to see things, but not to see properly. I mean, this can be at many levels, not to see things psychologically properly, not to see things physically properly. Like we said last week, not everything is as it seems. And so he starts by saying, what is it like to not see properly on a philosophical level, on a larger level? And he says, it is to look at the food, right? In this verse, the priest, the one who's offering you the food, or it doesn't have to be the priest, can be your mother, can be the waitress, the waiter, can be the Uber driver, if that's your thing. It's the bag, right? The whole delivery, everything about the ritual, the prayer, about that experience. An ordinary fella sees it as just that. It's an individual, it's food, thank you. That's where the conversation stops. However, Krishna is saying that in every form that is surrounding you, you have an opportunity, and you've always had an opportunity to develop a vision that you're capable of having. It just takes some practice. We call it growing clarity. Like anything, right? Anything worthwhile takes practice. It's not easy. In fact, an attitude could be that the harder it is, the more rewarding it likely is. The easier it is, the less rewarding it is. That's a general safe attitude to carry. So if you really want transformation, then find areas that are not easy, that kind of challenge you, test you. And so Krishna is now saying, what is proper vision? And he says, it is whereby the driver, the priest, the ritual, your words, yourself, your actions, the time, today, yesterday, people who have prepared the food, right, who you've never met. All of that resolves into one reality. And this one reality is a matter of knowledge. It's something that is a fact. If something is a fact, then it's about discovering that fact. This is true anyway. If something, for instance, is right, bothering you, then that which is bothering you is a fact. Something's bothering you. So therefore, you cannot say that nothing's bothering you because something is bothering me, suppose. So that's a fact. So now, because it's a fact, it involves you to look into it, does it not? To investigate what is the cause of this which is bothering me. And when you discover, for instance, it's the loud noise, or, you know, maybe it's some screeching of machines, some people don't like that, whatever it is, then you go, I have discovered the fact. So it was a matter of discovery, it's a process. Until you initiated that process, nothing would have happened. You just would have continued being frustrated or annoyed. So it does require that initiative. So Krishna says, when you discover this fact, you no longer look at the world as a fragmented world. Though it appears as such, there is a reality behind it. And every mithya form, as we said last week, is the effect that you see, the world of effects. Behind every mithya form, there is satyam behind that. Not that it's a locality, but it's a vision. And so by recognizing the world of forms, which is all you really have, through that very world of forms, you arrive to the final cause of the universe. That's all you have, the world of forms. There will never be a time where the inquiry doesn't involve forms. So when the mind tries to go into this formless, it's not possible, because formless is not an object. You see, it's not something that a mind can grasp. It is something to be understood by recognizing behind every thought or physical form, it's made of something different. We said that not everything is as it appears. When I look at a thought, it's actually just 5 elements. It's the same elements that make up the physical bark or a tree. Just very subtle matter that we don't really study in science, and you can't study it in science because you don't have any kind of instrumentation to see subtle matter from which your mind is made of. But you know it's there because there's a desire, right? There is, presence of love or dislike. That like or dislike or desire, that's actually matter. That's just really just a form of 5 elements arranging themselves in a shape which you call then love. It's really weird when you look at this like that. So you know that there is matter called subtle matter because you experience it every day. And you deal with it every day. So really, if you look at your life, it's really just a series of 2 things. Physical matter, which is what your eyes see, and subtle matter, which is what your mind sees. In fact, your mind is the very subtle matter. So it's all really just, you're really just dealing with matter, elements, 5 elements, from beginning to the end of your life. The whole thing was about 5 elements. 5 elements is just the Vedic model to help you kind of ask the question, from what is all this made of? And we said that, right, last week, it reduces into the tiniest particles, and then ultimately the time and space. Now, the 5 elements includes time and space, which is a really interesting model, because if you take the periodic table of elements, it doesn't include time and space. So 5 elements includes the liquids, solids, and gases, but also includes time and space. So everything in the universe is made of 5 elements, including your thoughts. So now if you want to ask, what are my thoughts made of, that I just keep on having, the opened tabs in my mind, 2,000 tabs in my mind, what are they all made of? 5 elements. That's what more can you say than that? Now, those 5 elements, they further reduce into, we discussed, intelligence. So it's really just intelligence taking the form of 5 elements, taking the form of periodic table of elements, taking the form of what you then see with your senses or the mind picks up. So now that you know, I know, Gagan, that we have introduced this model, think about how it might change how you look at the world. For instance, suppose for the longest time, the wave, you were one of those waves, was seeing the shore in the distance, and it knew that one day when it hits the shore, it will crash. And so it lived in a sense of, right, a terrified mode, an afraid mode, a mode that I have to get things done before I crash ultimately. So the shore represents the eventual, right, death of that wave. But the moment that wave goes through a framework that Krishna is giving us and hears the framework, just hearing it and considering it and, right, attempting to understand what it's really saying and how am I involved in that framework. Suppose you're that wave and it hears that framework, then for the time being, you appreciate yourself as this mithya wave in the ocean, a temporary mithya wave that's depending on, or it's not different from its very substance, which you really are, end of the day. That wave, you really are the water. So you know that one day this mithya wave will crash and it will be no more. People won't call you, they won't talk to you anymore because you're no more as a mithya wave. But the moment you change that cognitive shift, that knowledge, when you recognize the fact of who you are, you're really the essence of the whole ocean. So from that standpoint, you really automatically drop this idea that I'm going to end one day and I'm going to miss out on all of these forms, these beautiful forms, one fine day when I crash in the ocean, you're not going to miss out because the whole thing is you. Okay? So knowing this, you start to have a lot easier time how and what decisions you make in this world, because ultimately the whole thing is just you. So you will never really go out of existence. Now, another thing that Krishna points out is even the action itself is this final truth, Brahman. And he says, how is this so? Well, what we usually say in the scriptures is the wise person has renounced actions. But this doesn't mean that they physically renounce anything. It just means they've recognized through a cognitive shift that what really acts is not me. What really acts is the body, a mithya body, which is governed by Ishwara's laws. And this body and mind, they're both together, you were never it to begin with. It was always acting on its own accord, with its own direction, with its own conditionings. Even now, the way that your body and mind is listening to this body and mind, you're not doing this at all. Okay? So you're the presence, the Sakshi, in the presence of whom this body now that's listening is moving, shaking heads, thinking about what's being said, what this means for me. Now, even when you say what this means for me, even that whole conversation is just referring to the body and the mind, right? But the you, the real you, is the witness, in the presence of whom the conversation in your head is taking place. So when that shift occurs, you come to recognize an ever true fact. In fact, see, for the longest time, there was a you, an I. And this I knew something about itself that was false all along. So the I existed, though it was the whole thing, the water, it existed with a certain cognitive knowing. And the cognitive knowing that the I existed with was, I am this much, right? One wave in the ocean. And so for the longest time, that I, even though it was the whole ocean, existed as one wave. That wave you are right now. So you carried yourself as one wave. Since the longest time, there's no time when it all began. Since beginningless, it was timeless beginning, right? Since then, your I, though it was the whole thing, the truth of everything, the cognitive knowing of who you are as an existent being was, I am this much. I am a limited being amongst many, different from other waves in the ocean, different from other people, different from other things. And thus, your existence, your eternal existence was that much. So one day, you come to the pramana. And the Shastra and the Guru forces you to, of course, by your own permission, to re-question your existence. And when you re-question your existence, what you're really doing is you are focusing on the nature of this existent I. And so coming to a cognitive shift of this existent I, it discovers that though it is taking on a form, the form doesn't contradict your nature. The wave doesn't contradict the water because the wave is nothing but the water. And so coming to see this, you can still participate in the ocean with other waves and know that your waviness will come to an end one day. But now you carry yourself, that I carries itself with a certain cognitive knowledge. with a recognition of a fact. And that fact is, I am the truth of this entire ocean. Look at this. One eye, that eye was you all along, all times and all places. It was only about you. The whole thing was just you. If there was one being that was ever true, it was you. That you carried itself with a fact that was not true. And so you experienced that I as a small entity, incomplete, different from everyone else. And that's how you existed, as that much. Until one day, the pramana comes into your life, only to your punyam, tremendous amount of punyam in past lives, to be able to sit down, listen, pay attention, sincerely want to have that cognitive shift, stay long enough, and let that cognitive shift occur. And so the teacher then talks directly to that I, the Shastra does. And he says, wait, we're not getting rid of anything. We're just discovering something you missed out. Let me just bring it forward to you. And you go, what I was looking for, the final substance of the universe, awareness, I already, quote, have it. Because it's evident, right? In every thought, it's pervaded by awareness. So I have it already. It's not like I don't have it. So nobody can give it to me. I have it already. Not that you have it, but you go, that very awareness I am. That's my identity. That's my true identity. That's who I am. So from that moment on, that cognitive shift has occurred. And now that same I that carried itself as a limited being carries itself as the same self, but with a certain knowing, and knowing that is keeping true with who you really are. That's the only shift that happens. That's why we call it removing a notion, an ignorant notion, an ignorance that was denying you from seeing your true self as you really were, that you were not a separate identity, a separate entity. You were the whole thing. And so one life, discovering that, you continue to have this body that's given to you for a short amount of time that is going through what we call its own prarabdha, its own trajectory. If it has pains, the pains will continue. And there's a story of it's a fictional story of a monk who he was not enlightened, and so he got into a bar fight, and someone punched him in the eye, and so he had a black eye. And so next week he got enlightened, right? And students started to listen to him, and he was just fascinating. Everyone was just locked in, but they couldn't kind of just focus on his words, right? They were bothered. They were just looking at his black eye. It was just black. And one student got the courage to ask, why did you get the black eye? What happened? I can't listen. And he said, well, because before enlightenment, I got into a bar fight, and so someone hit me, and then the knowledge took place, and now I have to bear the black eye. Simple answer, but so true. And so whatever black eyes you've gotten before the knowledge took place, those black eyes, your body will continue to bear, your mind will continue to bear, and you just have to deal with it. If it's painful, it's your thing. You have to deal with it. You have to do the best you can to deal with it. There's no other way around it. But your shift, the shift of I has taken place. And so this is the journey of the wise person. And so what they understand is that shift. What is that cognitive shift, you might ask? It is like, suppose you say there's a vase or a pot, and the pot is equated to your body. The dimensions and the size is equated to your body, even the mind. It's just, you have a mind this big, it's not this big. And so the space inside is like your I, the self. Now, in the stage of ignorance, your I was as though limited, right? You thought that you were that much, but actually you were the whole space in which even the pot was in. Now, after the knowledge takes place, that I still appreciates its apparent limitation, but knows that limitation is due to the size of the pot. It's not due to the space. It recognizes that this I, which is the space inside the pot, is actually the space outside the pot also. And in fact, I, the space, am not inside the pot, but the pot is inside me. See that cognitive shift? Very simple. So this is what the pramana helps you to discover. Changes your perspective until something shifts in the mind and you say, wow, nothing that Vedanta is saying is a belief. It's something that I can verify all along, every step of the way. And so when that knowledge takes place, then you simply know it. You know it to be true. There's no doubts about it. And you move on with the rest of your black eyes, make the best of it. So this is the journey. Now, Gagan, and then we'll move forward.
I wanted to understand how time is also made of 5 elements.
Sure. So the question is, how is time made of 5 elements? So see, wherever there is, okay, let me lead you. Let's take a form, for instance, and we break that form down into smaller and smaller and smaller. And we will see that like a neutron, right, for instance, is, what is it, like 1,000 times smaller than the size of the atomic nucleus. So atomic nucleus is like that. And now one neutron in there, is like 1,000 times smaller than this ball. And it's just space, right? And you look inside the neutron even, it's just mostly space. Now, that space is what we say in the Veda is that which accommodates all of the other elements. It accommodates the tiniest of the particles. It accommodates anything. But to accommodate something, it requires it to last. That's time. So when you talk about space, you cannot talk about space, which accommodates, without simultaneously talking about time.
I think I lost you. How does accommodation result? I missed the piece about accommodation.
Sure. So what I meant by accommodation is from space arises, suppose like in a dream, like something relatable. From deep sleep arises the first object, like a tree. Now, when the tree arises, is it like the space first arises and then in space, in this black nothingness arises a tree, or they happen simultaneously? They happen simultaneously. So when a tree arises, with the tree is distanced from another tree. That distance is space, isn't it? So that distance below between two objects, that's called space. So space is just that which allows things to be positioned differently. Now, while they're positioned differently, they last. There's a certain duration to how long a tree lasts. And that duration, which is accommodated by space in the presence of space, it lasts. So this means there's a lasting factor. That lasting factor is also space. But we give it another name, we call it time. So whenever we have something that appears, it cannot appear without simultaneously having an accommodating principle, which we call space, and also a duration, and that's called time. So therefore,
almost like how a motion picture can be created by flipping through pages with images having different shapes, and if you flip through them, it seems like it's moving. Or whether it's a movie, there are lots of images that are flipping by past, so it creates an illusion that okay, this time is passing by, these movements are happening, but it's actually static
It's really
in
just one,
space.
even now for the mind, it's really just one image after another.
Mm.
Your mind just fools you, your brain fools you, and you see one smooth world, one smooth motion in this world. But it's really just one, if you were to slow time down, it would just be one image after another, which is always related to the previous image. So it's just one series of images, and your mind creates this sort of, flow because thoughts flow. And so it gives you an illusion of flow of the world. Um, so,
Thank you.
so even time is something that, is another mithya of that final substance. Okay, so they're just names that we attribute to point you back to this reality. So this reality, Brahman, manifests as time, space, and objects. And then to come to this reality, you have to look at the objects, time and space, and trace it backwards. So you never go straight to Brahman. You have to do it step by step by step backwards. And then when you come to Brahman, you also know, you cognitively understand how from Brahman arises the universe. So that's called understanding. If I just say to you, you're Brahman, and you say, yes, yes, I am consciousness, but you do not know how that is the case in reference to the world and time and space and everything around you, you don't really understand completely. So Vedanta has to completely show you from all angles what you are experiencing right now, because the whole thing is you. You cannot say this is me if you don't understand yourself. So Vedanta is just educating you. This is the whole thing is you right now. And Vedanta is just pointing out how this is arising out of you in this moment and how this is all you. Otherwise, to say, hey, this is all me, but I have no clue how this works, how that works, that's just a partial understanding. That's not full knowledge. So as we go through the chapters, we will keep building this vision more and more and more. Okay. That's what it means to, just like, when you know your life, I know my life. And you also know people who don't know their life. It's a mess, right? They say, no, I know my life. But you look at their life, it's a mess. And then you say, I know my life, and it's a lot more in order. And because it's in order, you're more at peace with things as they are. So in that same way, the whole thing is you. So we have to bring that from different standpoints, which will come in time. Okay. Last week, continuing, we also said the wise person, essential. So what is knowledge taking place? What does that mean? We said that the knower, the person that you think you are, right? The waking knower who goes through the waking conditions and the waking problems and the waking, waking happinesses. That waker, that's called the ahamkara. That's called the I sense waker. The waker I sense, or another name is waker knower. In Sanskrit, we call it jnatra. The knower who most take themselves to be. In fact, 99.9% of people take themselves to be this waking knower. They wake up and they go, I am this knower who's got stresses and anxieties and good things going on. But it's just really just the waking knower. That waking knower is completely subsided in the dream state. There's no connection to it. So it obviously cannot then be you because you are that which is there in all three states. So here's a question. What is it that the wise person's buddhi, or the knower, or the ahamkara, what is it that it understands that makes them liberated? What's actually going on? Because see, the instrument that carries your knowledge of yourself is really the buddhi. So if the knowledge takes place, or ignorance is in the buddhi of who you are, then where does knowledge take place? It has to take place in the same place where there's ignorance. So if ignorance of your nature is in your buddhi, then where does knowledge take place? In that very same buddhi. So when that buddhi, or that sense of I, who I think I am, the moment it recognizes its status as mithya, instantly it becomes identical with Brahman. This is very important. So for the longest time, your buddhi is like this, okay? And the relationship between the pot and the clay is a Satya-Mithya relationship, right? So the buddhi is here, the pot. This is who you always thought you were. This is your knower. The pot is equated here to the knower, or the buddhi, or the ahamkara, right? The sense of I, the waker. And for the longest time, without the pramana, it looked at itself as this much. I am a pot. So now every life, it was the clay. Every life it was the clay, but it was also the pot, but slightly different pot. One life it was like this, right? Another life it was like this. Another life it's like this. So every life, it took on two kinds of things. Not that they're different, but it always was the clay. In every life, it was the clay. But in every life, including this one, it takes on a different pot. Now, you get the pot based on your prarabdha karma. That's right. That's a different story. The moment this pot, where the knowledge takes place, recognizes its truth, at once this pot is identical with the clay. So now, what is it that occurs for the wise person? Because your buddhi, the one that says, I do not know who I am, I'm ignorant, I want to know this truth, what says that statement? What is it that is concerned or has anxiety about its nature, whether it's enlightened or not? What is it? It's the buddhi. So this buddhi, like the pot, says that, I do not know who I am. When it's given a pramana, the pramana says, look into yourself. The truth of you is the truth of every pot. Now, if you convert this into real life for us, every thought is your pot, because that's called your buddhi. Every thought you have, thought, what should I do tomorrow? Who am I? Who am I not? All of that is just like a pot. It's just a form, as we spoke already. It's just 5 elements. So those 5 elements, that buddhi has to come to its own truth. It has to say, so yes, there is a certain limitation about me as a pot, as a form, as a thought, as a whatever, an emotion. But my truth is always the clay. My truth, the truth of every thought is always awareness to bring it over. That's why wherever there is a pot, that's exactly where the clay is. Wherever there is a thought, what's always inside? What's pervading every thought? Awareness. You understand? So awareness is appearing as every thought, which you then say, and you bring up to another person. You say, here's awareness in a form of thoughts. Respond, please. And they hear it and they respond, giving you awareness in the form of their response. So it's really just awareness, a play of awareness, taking the form of different forms, which we call thoughts. And wherever there is a thought, that's exactly where awareness is. So then, how can you ever be away from that final reality, which is awareness? Because even right now, while you're listening, you're thinking, what does this mean? Even that is pervaded by awareness. You understand? That very awareness that's inside your thoughts right now. In fact, Andre's voice is just awareness in the form of this voice. And this voice is being heard by that mind, and that mind is really just nothing but awareness in the form of this form. So Andre is feeding you forms, and your mind is replicating those forms, but wherever there is a form, that's exactly where awareness is. And that awareness, that knowing principle that gives knowledge to these words, that is the real you. That's your identity. Thereby, the moment you have this shift from I am as good as every thought, that's where the errors happen. I am as good as every emotion. You are as good as every thought and every emotion. It's like, change the imagery, like the ring. As long as the ring focuses and talks about other ring forms and ornaments in the golden universe, and everyone's just feeding each other, talking about ornaments, feeding ornaments. I'm sharing ornaments with you, you're sharing ornaments with me, and we're all just caught up in ornamentals of beautiful ornaments, well-decorated ornaments, all day long ornaments. Tomorrow, we're going to be speaking more about ornaments, bangles, necklaces, rings, chains. Everyone is just into ornaments. Then for us, ornaments is as good as the real truth. That's all we have because we're speaking and focusing on the ornaments. Until one moment you say that, yes, despite the ornaments, there is a fundamental truth behind every word and sight and sound and feeling that we ever speak of and feel and hear and see and touch and taste and smell. The fundamental reality is the gold. And so wherever there is a sensation, a sight, a sound, that's exactly where awareness is. And this is not a belief. This is a directly verifiable statement because when is awareness not inside your thoughts? Never. So awareness actually makes up your thoughts, makes up your mind, but also, as we spoken last week, makes up the whole universe. Because we said everything resolves into that fundamental reality. Okay. Now, this Satya-Mithya understanding that wherever there is Mithya or an appearance of that reality, that's exactly where the reality is. This very teaching is exactly what chapter 4 title name is. And chapter 4 title name that we're speaking of is Jnana Karma Sannyasa. That means renouncing action, renouncing forms, renouncing the idea that there are actual forms through knowledge. What a perfect title name, isn't it? So the whole chapter 4 was really just coming to see through knowledge that despite the appearance of forms and thoughts and concerns and anxieties, they're just thoughts. Despite them, that's exactly where you will always find two things: existence, that thought exists, and awareness. And so existence and awareness, or Sat and Chit, they always make up every thought and every form. Even every form. You cannot say a form unless that form exists. And there is no form without the awareness of that form. So existence and awareness are one and the same. People sometimes say, by the way, I understood existence, but I'm confused. How is awareness also in every form? Well, very simple. To know that you exist, right? To be aware that you exist, you have to exist, don't you? And to exist, you have to have knowledge of your existence. There has to be awareness of your existence. So to know that I exist, I have to be aware of my existence. To be aware of my existence implies that I exist. So existence and awareness are actually synonyms. That's why we say Brahman. The nature of Brahman is Sat and Chit, existence and awareness. So now, the reason I'm saying this is because the question is like this. I've understood existence, but I've not understood awareness. Remember, they're one reality looked at from different angles to help you connect to what is you, who you are. It's just like saying the moon is bright and it's round. If you connect with brightness, great. If you connect with roundness, great. Either way, you're still referring to the moon. So the point being is that both existence and awareness are the content of every thought, of every object. And thus that is final truth. So not only is it the truth of the knower, that means the waking knower, it's also the truth of what makes up the dream knower, and it also makes up the sleep knower. It also makes up the object. So every object you see, as we spoke in last week, is also that very content, which is pervading it, and the knowing itself. So the knowing is every thought. So they say in Vedanta, 3 realities are all Brahman. The knower, the jnatra, the knowledge, or the knowing, the process, the thought, which is the jnanam, and the object, which is jnayam. So the knowing, that means the thought is Brahman, but Brahman is not the thought. The object is Brahman, but Brahman is not the object. And the waking knower, who you think you are, is Brahman, but Brahman is not the waking knower. Same thing with the dream knower and the deep sleep knower. Okay, so all realities are Brahman, while Brahman is free of all realities. How to understand this relationship? Simple. The wave is the water, but is the water the wave? Suppose you say no, what would be, why? Tell me why. What's the logic that I can say water is not the wave, but the wave is the water? The wave is the water, definitely, but water is not the wave, right? Tell me the logic why. It's the water, not the wave.
The wave disappears into the water.
Sorry?
The wave disappears into the water, if you literally look at that. But the water doesn't disappear into the wave.
Okay, good. I'm looking for a more refined answer, but it's a good start. The water is not the wave. Why not? Meenakshi?
The water is far larger, and then the wave arises and dissolves into it.
Okay, good. So the far larger is a much closer. So if the water was the tall wave, for instance, then could it have a short wave? No, you couldn't. So the water has to be free of the attributes of the waves in order for water to appear as tall wave, short wave, big wave, small wave, infinite amount of waves. Therefore, yes, Meenakshi?
Yeah, I also think that without the water, that cannot be the wave.
Yeah, however, my question was, why is it
Yeah.
that the water is not the wave? We need to understand it. Why is it that awareness is not the thought? That's the idea. Vanishri?
Yeah. So I would think that so waves cannot exist without water. However, water is fine with or without wave. It still exists even in different form, but waves do not exist without the water. Like it doesn't have a form without the water.
Good, good. So now it's contingent on the presence of its substance, the water. Good. Okay. However, the question specifically was, why is it that I can say with confidence that the water is not the wave, that awareness is not the thought, awareness who you are is not your life, is not your problems, is not your joys, is not even your happiness. Because all that happiness, joy, anxiety, that's just like the waves. So why can you then say that awareness or water, the analogy, is not the waves? Pankaj.
My view is water is like, the wave is like the snake, whereas water is like the rope.
That has a context. However, that has a context in a different way,
Yeah.
rope and snake.
And water is infinite and wave is finite.
Okay, that's much better. Yeah, the water is infinite and wave is finite. Okay, again, the question goes, why can I say that the water is free of the wave, that who you are, awareness, is free of you, the person?
Wave is a deception. Wave is an illusion. And water is the reality.
Okay, could you maybe refine that and say that the wave is an appearance of
Yeah.
water? Not necessarily,
Wave is
it's not tucham, it's not illusion, it's mithya.
okay. Yeah.
Mithya, because it depends on the water. So that's much more accurate, refined, and keeping with the tradition than saying it is like sky flowers, which is illusion, tucham. Vijay?
Can we also say that wave comes and goes? It's whereas water is always there. Whether there is wave or no wave, water is always there. But waves are just yeah, an illusion or appearance which comes in different shapes and forms and comes and goes.
Good. In
So
other
what
words,
remains when it is there or when it is not there is all that constant water, right?
excellent. So in other words, the fact that waves come and go, but something doesn't come and go, shows you that that something, which is the water, is not contingent on the wave. So therefore, it has to be free of the life and death of the wave. The life and death of the wave does not equal life and death of the water, because it's still supplying itself to all other waves which are going through life and death. Good. Okay. Kendall?
I was going to say, like, if you look into a wave, it's nothing but water, H2O. If you look at H2O, there's no waveness there. There's no form there at all. So the wave cannot go back and be H2O. It already is. I'm trying to put it in my own words,
Very good.
but
Very good.
the H2O itself is always only
Yeah.
H2O.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no form there.
Excellent, excellent. So it doesn't have to go back to H2O, or you cannot say that I've now one fine day became H2O. I got enlightened and now I became H2O. No, 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 no. You just discovered what you always were. Your identity was in the waterness, in the waveness. And that waveness you still come to appreciate for a couple more years, but your truth is now the water, the H2O, which will never cease, which will never die, which has never done anything. What has really done was the wave. The wave has been driven by its own compulsions, and so it started to slap other waves, and other waves slapped it, and so it got kind of, a little bit greedy sometimes. But all of that, you thought you were, because your identity was in the wave. So the moment you shift that, then that all those consequences that are going to return back to the wave, they no longer return back to you because you are the water. And so at once you are relinquished from all past causes, all your so-called sins and errors, and all your punyam and papam is no longer yours. So this is not a ticket, of course, to now go, slapping other waves, because you know yourself as the water. All right. So the verse continues. It says, Tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. So this is still verse 24. And it's saying that Brahman is to be attained, or is attained, by him or her who always sees Brahman in every action, everywhere. It's like the wave always sees nothing but the water in all the movements, in all the so-called movements or actions of other waves. It's just water, and in everywhere. So there's nothing but this one reality. So seeing Brahman everywhere, it's not implying that you see it as an object, because it is everything. So you will never find it in one particular thing. It can only be understood as the whole thing. And this is, again, important. If you just hear the statement, oh, that is everything is Brahman, that's not good enough. As I said earlier, you need to understand cognitively, what do you mean by that? How do I arrive to that statement step by step without the help of the guru or the scriptures? And we were very clear and explicit last week and the week before how to do that, by the reduction of smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can cognitively thus see that though your eyes are programmed to see forms, behind those forms, it is a Satya-Mithya relationship. So that knowledge alone is what frees you from the cycle of taking on a new form of a wave. And therefore, you own up to your truth. You own up to who you are. Now, suppose The teacher says you own up to your truth as Brahman, as awareness. And then your mind responds, what do you mean by own up to Brahman? I suppose, excellent example. So here it goes. Let's improvise. So one wise person owns up to their truth. Mind responds, what do you mean by own up to the truth? Okay, let's investigate that. So that thought, did that thought exist? What do we say about Brahman? It is existence awareness. There's only Brahman. So that thought too is just 5 elements, taking on the form of an unpleasant thought called a doubt. Call it whatever you want. So that thought exists. What else is that thought pervaded by? That doubt. By awareness. What do we say about the final reality? Existence awareness. Therefore, existence awareness is pervading every single form. It doesn't matter what form it is. Whether it is a doubt, like what do you mean own up to awareness, is just a form that has taken on a shape, which you call it, what do you mean by owning up to Brahman? This form you call a pot. Look at this. This is called a pot. This form you call, this 5 elemental form you call hand. This 5 elemental form you call screen. 5 elemental form of the mind you call, what do you mean by owning up to Brahman? You see, they're just names. They're just names taking on a form, nothing but 5 elements, which resolves into intelligence, which is further contingent on the presence of existence and awareness. Therefore, the final truth is always revealing itself in every thought that you ever have about yourself or don't have about yourself. It doesn't matter. What I want to show is you cannot come out of who you are. You cannot come out of the final reality. It is all that is here. If there's one thing that we can say for sure, it exists, and there is awareness through and through, whatever it is. Therefore, existence awareness is the final truth. However, backup plan. Suppose, once again, you say, okay, this was a little bit better, but now I'm still not getting it. You said everything is Brahman. That's a very reassuring statement. Thank you. But can you help me a little bit more? Because my mind's not ready right now. No problems. Now we're going to stage 2. We call it deliberate superimposition. So what you do is you say, just like an Australian flag, it represents the entire Australia, or the Mauritian flag represents the entire Mauritius island, right? So when you look at a flag, what comes to your mind? The entire country. So in that same way, you apply what's called an upasana, or contemplation. Suppose we take love, or gratitude, or vastness, or beauty, or eternity, and you use that, and you deliberately superimpose it, and you make consciousness, that final formless reality, which you can never objectify, you take that and you make it love. You take that and you make it beauty, or vastness, or eternity. So you're giving your mind something to work with until it's able to just let go and, quote, own up to Brahman, that there is nothing that it needs to do to own up to Brahman, because it already is Brahman. That's what owning up to Brahman really means. But until then, you give it some form to work with, which is called deliberate superimposition. And this is why we have the next verse to talk about the 2 paths by which you can own up to the final truth. This will be in verse 25. Daivam eva pare yajnam yoginaf pariyupasate brahmagna vapare yajnam yajne naivo pajuhpati.
Karma yogins perform only those rituals that invoke the deities, while others, sannyasins, offer themselves by themselves onto the fire knowledge of Brahman.
Karma yogins perform various forms of rituals or self-help ways to help themselves, to invoking deities, and sannyasins who entirely dedicate themselves to self-knowledge. And these are the 2 committed lifestyles by which every person arrives to this final truth. It doesn't matter if they are what religion they're from, or whether they think that this doesn't apply to them, this is still true for everyone. You may not call it karma yoga, but you're still doing karma yoga. We'll see why now. You may not call it sannyasi, but you're focused on the knowledge entirely, but you're still a sannyasi. So we're just going to give them two names, but you will see now that every person from every culture at all time is really only pursuing these two paths when it comes to discovering who they are, discovering God, or whatever language they use. So here, actually in chapter 3, verse 3, Krishna stated that at the time of this universe, which was never a beginning, but when it came, he gave us two lifestyles. And those two lifestyles were both a karma yogi and a sannyasi. And now going to this verse is going to follow up to chapter 3, verse 3. He continues and expands upon that. He says, both the karma yogi and the sannyasi, what they are, we will explain. They both perform or practice what's called a yajna. And the word yajna can have two meanings, either a ritual or a sacrifice. And it's very interesting, like, how do you reconcile that? Well, when you perform a ritual or some part of action, what you have to give up certain amount of time. You have to kind of give up something else. If you want to get good at something, then you put a ritual into it, maybe work or maybe time or study. That's a ritual. Ritual is anything that is a series of actions. To put a ritual into something, you have to certainly give up, watching your favorite movie, for instance. So that's why the word yajna is really just ritual. But whenever there's a ritual, there's also a sacrifice. There's a little bit of that, I have to give something else up. However, the word ritual doesn't always have a negative connotation of giving or losing something out. It can also mean I am relinquishing or letting go what is not helpful for me. Because whenever you do a ritual, like dating is, courting is a ritual, work is a ritual, talking to patients is a ritual, talking to children is a ritual. Everything is really just a ritual. Your whole life is a ritual. What you're really doing is, if the ritual is performed properly, then you can let go of a lot of things that are unhealthy for you. If you have a ritual of a proper communication ritual and you come to the bottom of the matter, then you sacrificed or you've let go something that was holding you back. So in that sense, a ritual doesn't always mean it is a sacrifice in this negative connotation. Oh, I'm sacrificing. I'm doing a ritual, but I'm sacrificing. No, you're really just letting go of what doesn't serve you. Because who does rituals to get injured? Nobody. You do rituals to help yourself. So he says thus, both paths, karma yogi and sannyasi, lead to the same end. So neither is superior or inferior. Interesting. So let's start with karma yogi. Who is a karma yogi? A karma yogi, see, karma means action, and yogi means you're turning those actions into a spiritual work to grow and to discover who you are. So karma yogi sees one important thing, that self-knowledge is the ultimate aim of this life. So to be a karma yogi, you are certainly seeing the ultimate aim is moksha. You're not a karma yogi if you don't have this aim. So what makes you a karma yogi right from the get-go? You're an ordinary person who wants moksha. Instantly, you're a karma yogi. You don't have moksha yet, but you want moksha, you're a karma yogi. However, that's still not the full definition of karma yogi. I want moksha, but I do not deny my secondary goals, my secondary needs, relationships, working for myself, on myself, working on my business, still building myself, into some person, becoming successful in the world. So these two is what makes a karma yogi. Number one, I want moksha. Two, I do not discard my secondary needs. And thus I fully pursue my secondary needs. Why? Because in so doing, I will become a larger, a bigger person, more confident in myself, more reassured. I will discover skills about myself. And thus, the karma yogi converts this whole thing of for me into act of service. We call it in Sanskrit loka sangraha. Okay, so no longer for just for me, for my ends, for my benefit in the future. No, I'm doing it because by me getting educated, I'm helping everyone else, I'm helping myself, I'm helping the world, I'm helping developing, being a better person, which everyone around me is going to benefit. But I'm doing it for the sake of moksha. That's what makes you a karma yogi. And thus, they have a love for truth, they have a love for inquiry, but they do not discard their secondary needs in life. Family continues, everything else continues as normal. And so the verse says here, what kind of activities do they do? Daivam karma, a ritual that invokes deities. So deity can be anyone that reminds you, as we said, deliberate superimposition, anything that reminds you of this higher power, of the presence of Ishvara, Ishvara's order, something that you can devote to, something that just brings you that emotional connection to something bigger than just, you know, things around you. So anything like that, they have, like the sun, that's a brilliant form of worship, you know, this powerful, bright object in the sky. Here's a question. What's the difference between a karmi and a karma yogi? I asked this some sessions ago. I'm going to ask it again. What's the difference between a karmi, an ordinary person who just does action, and a karma yogi?
The karma yogi is aware of moksha and is working towards moksha.
Super. You cannot go wrong with this statement.
Karmi is the one who just works for his own benefit.
Okay, good, good. Okay. So in other words, it is for my future reward, for my future.
It's special because due to the body identification, he identified it's for my benefit.
Yes, yes. So in other words, whether it's Svarga, Loka, whether it is better, you know, tomorrow, whatever it is, so it doesn't mean they're a bad person. They just naturally want to, right, grow and be, you know, reward themselves. Okay. Vijay?
Can we say that karmi is one who goes up and down, meaning if things work in his favor, he's happy. If things don't work in his favor, he's dejected. Whereas a karma yogi does an action for the sake of action, rather than being that samat. He maintains that equanimity no matter what the result is. Would that be a right?
Sure. So, I mean, both, I mean, even a karmi can do an action for the sake of action. Karmi can also do an action for the sake of growing. Karma yogi also does an action for the sake of growing. However, very important what Meenakshi said, a karmi does an action for the sake of growing so that they can benefit as an individual. A karma yogi engages in work to benefit, not for them strengthening their individuality, but to relinquish it one fine day through moksha. That's the difference. So again, what's the difference between a karmi and a karma yogi? Simple answer. A karmi does things for their own benefit. Okay, this is not bad or good. It's just how it is. Most people are like this. A karma yogi also does things for their own benefit, but long enough until I can relinquish this person who I think I am. Now, you can also add that a karma yogi, see, there is loka sangraha, of course, they would be of service. But again, even a karmi does things of service. You see this? So I want to be very distinct. What is that defining factor which you will not find between a karmi and a karma yogi? What you will find is they will both work on themselves. They will both do loka sangraha. They will both clean up the oceans. They will both engage in community service. But the difference is one does it so they can be a good person. They can be rewarded in the future, whether it is heaven or whatever it is, whether they believe in that or not, I don't know. But karma yogi does it so that I can grow as a relative person only one day to see through this person that I'm much more than this person. That's the difference. So karma yogi's vision is on moksha. Karmi's vision is on amplifying, boosting the person. So if you think about it like this, essentially then the entire spiritual field is really just karma yoga. As long as you want moksha, you want enlightenment, whether you want, in Buddhist, you want nirvana, or whatever you want to call it, kevalam, whatever you want to call it, and you're working on yourself for that goal, you're essentially a karma yogi, which is why I said karma yoga is not a word in the Gita. It's not India word. It's a word that is everyone is doing. Krishna is just bringing it out forward and putting a name onto it. He's saying it's yoga inside every karma. It is moksha's goal behind every action. That's what you really want to do behind every action. Now, what happens is because you've been a karma yogi for such a long time, when moksha takes place, you still continue as a lifestyle of a karma yogi. Loka sangraha, still continue your service, continue working on the mind. Now it's called no longer karma yoga, now it's called nididhyasanam. So it really just continues in a state of upward trajectory. So if a karma yogi engages in yajnas for the sake of maturity, for the sake of moksha, then a sannyasi engages in yajna for the sake of moksha. It sounds like the same thing. Well, a karma yogi, we said, does not give up their secondary needs, their worldly duties. A sannyasi, see, in the modern age, a sannyasi isn't just someone with an ochre robe. You can also say they're retired. And their entire focus is now self-knowledge. Upanishads, Brahma Vidya, Atma Jnanam. And so, thus, he says, how so is this? Through neti, through contemplation, through negation of who I am not, through Satya-Mithya teachings. All of this is within the part of the sannyasi's life. And so they're working like this on their mind also, but they don't have the duties of worldly goals because they're retired or, right, from an Indian standpoint, they're, given by the ashram or something like that. And so he says, yajnena eva upajuhvati. So what does a sannyasi do? By sacrifice or discipline, that's another word for sacrifice, by discipline, indeed, they offer themselves into the fire of knowledge of Brahman. In other words, they offer their I sense, their ahamkara, into the fire of knowledge. If there's one thing that you can give away, it's what? Because if everything's Brahman, what can you give to what?
Identity. You can give away your identity.
Which is erroneous.
As an individual.
Good. That's the only thing. See, it's kind of like paradoxical. You can't give away anything because the whole thing is Brahman. And yet now we say you are throwing something into the fire of Brahman as if there's two things. And what are you throwing? You're throwing that which was never yours to begin with, ignorance. You're throwing your ignorance of your nature into the fire, and this fire consumes that ignorance, and what remains is, well, who you always were. And that goal is the goal for both the Deva Yajna and the Jnana Yajna. So that's the two paths. The one who engages in Deva Yajna worships deities, worships, modern language, not just worships, but devotes, right? It brings Ishvara into their life, does prayers, does, cleans up their mind, does Antakarana Shuddhi. That's Deva Yajna. The other path is Jnana Yajna. And both of them are the same goal. Now, sannyasi, in modern language, is more of a direct path. In Neo-Vedanta, we call this direct path. Whereas the karma yogi is more of a surefire path because you're addressing your mind, the very obstacle that stops most people from assimilating this knowledge. Which is why taking the path of a sannyasi, especially in Neo-Vedanta, where you just skip all the Satya-Mithya, there's no Ishvara, there's no devotion, just give me the self-knowledge. Mostly you will find these in the Ramana Maharishi circles. That's basically direct path. The reason why this fails for most people is because it tempts you to skip cleaning up the instrument, which is required to be mature and composed and relatively sharp before the knowledge can take place. So the path of sannyasi has a lot more risk than a path of karma yogi, because karma yogi, you are doing what you can to help your mind, to help that needs to understand its nature. Whereas a sannyasi, you're skipping that crucial part and you just want the knowledge right now. But that mind, just the fact that it's so impatient shows you he doesn't have sadhana chatushtaya. He doesn't have the right qualifications. So just to be impatient and want the knowledge right now in itself is an indicator the mind is not entirely ready to get it, because there's no question of speeding it up, because the key you don't hold. Who holds the key? Ishvara holds the key. But if I don't tell you about Ishvara because you don't want to hear it, since you're on the direct path, then you're going to say, no, there's no Ishvara, it's in my hands. So then the person gets in this loop of frustration, thinking they're supposed to get it, the teacher is not teaching properly, but the real problem is the mind is not qualified. Therefore, karma yoga is a very safe path for everyone. What about those people who don't have karma yoga? Like most people that we know, that you will meet. How would they make it? Because the whole thing is Krishna's glory. Are they doomed forever? No, they're not. Because sheer experience will also teach you and give you feedback what's the right way to conduct yourself, where you've gone off track, and how to come back. Something will happen. Something always happens to everyone, and something dramatic. And that dramatic forces the person to turn around and look into a different path altogether. So don't think that someone's been 40 years doing nothing. Something will happen, guaranteed. And they will be forced to literally rethink their whole assessment of their existence. I've seen it before, and it's miraculous to see it. How someone who you were convinced this person is beyond growth, they will never change, and something happens, and you suddenly see them magnificently changing because they have no choice. Often it's a breakage of a relationship, of a 20 or 40-year-old relationship. Someone dies. Those two tend to be the biggest catalysts for an ordinary person. Yeah, so Ishvara has prepared and is taking care of everyone to snap them out of their little personal world. Something's going to happen, but everyone is taken care of. An ordinary person, a karmi, a karma yogi, and a sannyasi, all of them are ultimately only heading towards the final truth. It's just a matter of time. Now, someone's going to say, okay, then everyone's heading towards the truth. That means ultimately there will be no more jivas in this world, right? Because everyone's going to get enlightened. So that's never going to happen, because you will always have insects. You will always have, they're also jivas. You will also have ants and sharks and fish, tigers and snakes. So jivas isn't just here on earth. There are infinite jivas throughout the universe, according to the Vedas, and they just keep on recycling. And somebody realizes their truth, and they've done it. But there will always be jivas on earth, because technically, if this entire existence is anadi, beginningless, then if you want to go by the logic that one day the jivas will go out of existence, it should have already happened, because it is anadi. It had infinite amount of time for that already to happen, but it didn't. So therefore, that statement cannot take, it's a fallacy. See, I was on Ramana's path also for the longest time, since 17. He was like the only, the most glorious person for me. He was everything. And I read his books, like most of us did, nothing special. And he always reflected that, that ultimate person, that one who's attained it all. So his questions had to adapt to different minds, to very advanced minds, to simple minds. And so when you read a mixture of that, and it doesn't have a structure, then you sort of all take it on, and you think you're supposed to understand it all, but really it's not really customized. It's not taking you step by step all the way from where you are to where you need to be. It's not taking you there. It's just mentioning the highest, but you're just asking, how do I get there? Like, what's the means to I get, where's the pramana? So only when Vedanta came into my life, instantly I recognized what a pramana is, what it means to be offered a ladder with rungs where you can grab on, hold on, and go all the way to the top. The difference is night and day between the two kinds of teachings, between Ramana Maharishi's teachings and a whole circle, not necessarily his teachings, but within the whole community, and Advaita Vedanta, such as Swami Dayananda, Swami Chinmaya, Paramarthananda, and what the kind of works they do. It's night and day difference. Yeah. And the moment Vedanta came into my life, it was instant. Wow, instantly clear, all done. Thank you very much. Why? Because the mind was already, prepared by the Ramana's teachings. So
yes.
Yeah, so he's still my greatest hero because, he took so many people to this path. He was like something about him that just takes so many people and inspires them. However, if you really want to get there to what he understands, you need a proper pramana, and Vedanta is it. Now, verse 26 is going to say the karma yogi who we speak of. So let's now focus on the karma yogi, is given two paths of mastery. The first is a mastery of their senses, that means making them more deliberate, and mastery of objects, that means reassessing the value of objects, because we said you're always ever surrounded by objects. Thoughts are also your objects. So now let's reassess the value of objects so you can have a more objective, equanimous relationship versus being taken for a ride by a constant, flow of objects in your life. Verse 26. Shrotra dinindriyan yanye samyam agnishu juhvati shabda din vishayan anya indriya gnishu juhvati.
Others offer their organs of hearing and other senses into the fire of self-mastery, while still others offer sound and other sense objects into the fire of the senses.
If you divide this verse into two parts, the first is Shama, mastery of the mind, and the latter is Dhamma, mastery of the senses, in summary. So let's talk about others offer organs of hearing, etc., your sight and sound. You offer it into the fire of self-mastery, Shama, in one word, management of the mind. What is management of the mind? Well, whenever there's a discomfort, that is a moment of opportunity for you. When there's some friction or some challenge, in that moment, you can look at the stories you're telling yourself, and then you can ask, how might I look at this differently to help me, let go of this story? Because the story has been holding me for a long time, and so I just need to let go of this story. So this way, when you release one distortion in your life, that ultimately, it really just, because every thought is connected to other thoughts, it also relinquishes all of your other distortions. So if you just take some time, maybe 10 minutes or whatever it is, to look at one distortion, maybe, impatience or need for judging or whatever it is, and just look at that one story and you say, what do I not like about this? What is so wrong about this situation? Slight question, then that, owing to its association to everything else, if you let that go, you're able to undo many other connected distortions. And an example of this is how to look at your mind. Let's imagine that your mind is a garden. So everyone's mind is a garden right now. Okay. So in the garden, what do you plant? Seeds, right? What kind of seeds can you plant in the garden? In fact, that everyone plants two kinds of seeds. You got weeds and you've got flowers. The weeds represent those unhelpful thoughts, and flowers represent thoughts that are noble. So you got ignoble distortions and you got noble thoughts that are, pleasant. Now, when you've planted these weeds and flowers, which we do both through the course of time, depending on the quality, because sometimes there's good weed, isn't there? So even weed is not that bad. Depending on the quality of the weed and the flowers, what kind of insects would that attract? Well, it depends on the quality of the weeds and flowers. So now the question is, what kind of insects do you want crawling in your mind? Insects that, suppose, I go like this, open up the scalp, and then butterflies fly out. And I go, wow, you got incredible thoughts. Let me stitch it back up. Great. Others, you take the half of a, head off, and then comes out, cockroaches and spiders and creepy crawlies and all this. I'm like, let me close it again and stitch it up. Okay, you got something to work on. And I say, why are you having so much, creepy crawlies falling out? And you say, because I've been thinking about certain thoughts for a long time and they became crystallized in my mind. Because the stories that I kept telling myself, they kept on building, right, through neuroplasticity, they kept on embedding themselves and becoming part of who I am as a person. And then I say to you, that's okay. So this is where you're at. This is wonderful. However, the good news is you can change that. You can absolutely start to change the way that you think. And through course of time, little by little, you will be surprised how much your mind can actually listen to you and how quickly and how much it's willing to listen to you. And you say, well, what do you mean? Can you give me an example? And I say to you, well, suppose you say this person is adharmic. You see someone and you say, this person is so evil. They're such a fool. You don't say adharmic nowadays. You say they're, whatever word. They're so adharmic. And I say to you, okay, so that's the kind of crystallized insect that's been crawling in your mind for a long time. But then I say to you, is it true that just because that person is doing something adharmic or not wise in that particular case, does that make the entire person adharmic? Is the entire person evil because they're just being impatient, or they're cutting you on the road or being rude on the road? Does that make the entire person completely adharmic? No. So then I say to you, so how then could you look at this in a different way? Maybe you can still criticize the behavior, but know that the person is so much more than just one act. You're also like this. I'm also like this. I can be like very, cold in one situation, but completely friendly in another situation. You're like this also. Everyone's like this. So this is where you start to re-see things in a different way. You say, well, it's possible. It's possible that I don't have to stay and listen to a negative conversation. I can, without shutting the other person down, I can say, well, here's my take on it. I don't have to say, no, I don't want to listen to you. I can just say to you, but here's my take on it. Here's what I have to say. So you don't have to kind of be rude. You can still mention what you want to say without causing awkwardness in a conversation. Another idea is on how to have butterflies coming out and not creepy crawlies is, see, when we were children, we all had this dream in us, right? This dream of, I want, what is possible. They were dreams of possibilities. Remember that as a little innocent child who was, without any judgments, nobody told them you can't. What do we do as children? We looked forward to the future. We were positive, optimistic about what is possible. We said, I want to be this. I'm going to do that. There was no sense of I can't because I'm young, I'm stupid. In fact, look at this. The child didn't know anywhere near as much as you know today, and yet their inspiration, their self-forward momentum was so much greater. And so perhaps we can borrow this from children, from your child, and say, let me look forward to what's possible. Let me ask myself, what do I want? Instead of asking what do I don't have or how much I don't have, let me start to say, what do I want? What kind of life do I want to surround myself with? What kind of a life do I want to make for myself? And open up those possibilities for you, because when your brain listens to this, it starts to find ways to make it happen. It starts to find ways to actually bring that, how you feel in life, according to that vision that it's possible. I can be that person who remembers, who feels the presence of Ishvara in my life. I can be that person who, figures this out. I can be that person who's patient and a little bit, more depth and nuanced in thinking. I can. What else is possible for me? And you get really curious. So to close this off, here's an exercise for us, and then we'll stop. Okay, take this down. We're all going to do this. When this class ends, you're going to put on a piece of paper or in your head, it goes like this: I can, and then fill in the blanks. And come up with 10 things that you can. I can figure this out. I can be, little bit, more patient, whatever it is, I can. Make it personal. I can. Become that little child for a while and see what happens. This is our exercise as we close. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.